I'm Nima Rajan. The provinces and territories are pressing on with their COVID-19 vaccination campaigns, with over 283,000 shots put into arms just yesterday. More than 19 million jabs have been administered so far. Over 608,000 vaccine doses were delivered to the provinces yesterday as the federal government divvies up some earlier than expected arrivals of Pfizer shots. About 4.5 million doses from Pfizer and Moderna are expected to arrive in Canada this week. Well, meanwhile, the country's chief public health officer expects Canadians who got the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine as their first dose will soon be able to choose which vaccine they want for their second shot. Dr. Teresa Tam says a small Spanish study on mixing and matching vaccines reported that giving a Pfizer-BioNTech shot for the second dose after AstraZeneca is safe. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization is still awaiting further data from another mixing and matching study underway in the United Kingdom. The House of Commons Heritage Committee will resume its clause-by-clause analysis of Bill C-10 today. Justice Minister David Lametti appeared before the committee yesterday, telling MPs that it's not his role to give legal opinion on a bill that aims to regulate internet platforms. None of the opposition MPs seemed satisfied with what they got from Mr. Lametti, but the Liberals had enough support to set the debate aside. If the bill passes in an eventual vote, it will mark the first major updates to the Broadcasting Act since social media platforms became a major source of communications. The government of Yukon says it has scheduled clinics for youths aged 12 to 17 to receive the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. The territory says clinics will be set up at schools in nearly every community, with medical travel will be supported in communities where a clinic is not held or for youth who are unable to make it to their clinic in their community. It says that due to limited supply and strict handling requirements, the Pfizer vaccine will only be available to Yukon youth for a short time, and clinic dates will be more limited than adult vaccine clinics. Out of control wildfires are forcing evacuations in at least 2 provinces. People have been forced from more than 40 homes by a fire raging in a remote community north of Winnipeg. And in Saskatchewan, dry conditions and strong winds caused a large wildfire to grow to 40 square kilometers yesterday near the city of Prince Albert. The Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency says getting the fire under control is days away, and at least 50 homes have been evacuated. A Manitoba First Nation has declared a state of emergency due to suicides after a 7-year-old was rushed to hospital this week after a failed attempt. A mother of 4 from the Shamattawa First Nation also died earlier this month. Northern Manitoba Grand Chief Garrison Sati says the issue has only become worse as the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the gaps in mental and emotional health services. The community is calling for immediate mental health supports from the federal government. A new report says the COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically worsened Ontario's opioid crisis. Researchers with the Ontario Drug Policy Research Network at Toronto's St. Michael's Hospital say opioid-related deaths were up more than 75% from March to December 2020 compared to a year before. Co-author Tara Gomes says the homeless population and those who were unemployed were hit particularly hard by fatal overdoses. In all of 2020, more than 2,400 people died from opioids, which was a 60% increase from 2019. The Kyrgyz Republic says it is taking control of the Kumtor gold mine for 3 months, effective immediately. The government says it sent a letter to Centerra on Sunday to request clarification of reports that it had suspended deliveries of materials needed to operate the mine and had disabled critical sensors used to monitor the stability of the mine and the movement of nearby glaciers. Centerra CEO Scott Perry says the company is no longer in control of the gold mine and can no longer ensure the safety of the mine's employees or operations. Canada's Environment Minister is advising Canadians excited about camping during the second COVID-19 summer to be careful. Jonathan Wilkinson says nature and green spaces have been very important to people in weathering the pandemic, which he notes isn't over. He says Parks Canada has brought in rules that its national parks that conform to public health orders. Those rules vary from place to place, so he says it will be important to check websites to know what the restrictions are. The mayors of Toronto and Montreal have placed a bet on the outcome of the NHL playoff series between the Maple Leafs and Canadiens. Toronto Mayor John Tory and Montreal Mayor Valerie Plante will be donating $500 to their local team's charity. the MLSC Foundation for Toronto, and the Montreal Canadiens Children Foundation. And the mayor of the losing city will donate an additional $500 to the winning team's charity. The Canadiens and Maple Leafs, one of the oldest rivalries in the NHL, have not met in postseason since 1979. All right, stay tuned. We'll have more news from around the world coming up on the Forum Daily after the break, so stay with us. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization is confirming that they believe it's safe and effective to offer the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine to adolescents. Health Canada authorized Pfizer for kids between 12 and 15 years old on May 5th after the company completed a clinical trial which found that it was safe and 100% effective at preventing kids in that age group from getting COVID-19. NACI's advice comes after most provinces have already added the age group to their vaccination plans. Manitoba began allowing kids that age to book appointments this week, and Ontario plans to open up vaccinations to youth under 18 by the end of the month. Most other provinces are working on expanding to that age group as well. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says almost 50% of eligible adults in Canada have received at least one shot of COVID-19 vaccine. Well, joining us now in our weekly medical segment is Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Appletree Medical Group. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, the approval of the Pfizer shot for kids between 12 and 15 was given after a U.S. study on its effectiveness on this demographic. So what do we know so far about the results of this study, sir?
So it's been a very interesting study and certainly a long-awaited study because it allows us to look at our immunization programs and really plan. The study was conducted in the United States. There were about 2,260 adolescents aged 12 to 15 that Pfizer did an inoculation for, and the trial found that the vaccine was 100% effective in this age group. Remember, previously, the number was 95% efficacy after the second shot with older age groups, so very promising there.
And what do we know about the safety of other COVID-19 vaccines on this particular age group, doctor?
So we know Pfizer appears to be quite safe. What do we know about Moderna? Moderna's vaccine is likely about 96% effective for the adolescents aged 12 to 17. They've done their own trial that we've been looking forward to as well, 3,200 participants there. So things are looking very promising for Moderna as well. AstraZeneca, because of the concerns about the blood clots and the fact that they tend to occur in younger people, the studies have paused on any AstraZeneca effectiveness in adolescents.
Now, considering that children were found to have stronger immune systems when it comes to the COVID virus, how should the prioritization of the shot be organized for this age group?
This is an interesting question. Typically for infectious disease, young children tend to be most at risk. For instance, when we look at malaria or even the Spanish flu in 1918, children and young adults were at the greatest risk. But in COVID-19, we see the exact opposite. Using the Canadian data, we can see that if someone aged under 19 contracted COVID-19, they'd only have a 1.7 chance of hospitalization. On the other end of the spectrum, if you were over 80, you would have 28% chance of hospitalization. So ideally, you still want to focus on the high-risk groups as best you can.
And what about those younger than 12 years old, doctor? Is there any research being conducted on the effectiveness of vaccines on this particular demographic?
That's right. So Pfizer has certainly started a clinical trial on testing it from 6 months going to 11 years. Moderna is doing exactly the same, 6 months to 12 years in children there. Now remember, the younger we go with these groups, the more caution for these results. So I expect that both Pfizer and Moderna will have some preliminary findings end of summer. And then after authorization, we're probably looking at next year for vaccinations under 12.
Now, considering that NACI, and we talked about this a little last week, that NACI walked back on previous recommendations around the AstraZeneca vaccine, how should Canadians react to this new information from NACI?
Yeah, it certainly is tough. What I like now is that NACI is really focusing on evidence-based recommendations and evidence-based medicine. So we expect that these vaccines will be quite safe for our children. We do know that younger people are less likely to experience serious cases of COVID-19, but having the access to an effective vaccine will help control the disease's spread to family and friends.
All right, Dr. Raut, about a minute left, but heading into the summer break now, do you have any advice for parents that are looking for more normalcy in their children's lives as they await their inoculation?
Right. Yeah. So it's a kind of a mixed picture. If we look at the prevalence, we find that about 20% of all COVID cases are under the age of 19. So it's still a group that we have to really focus on there. But there is some good news. We're starting to see overnight and day camps likely to reopen in Ontario for the summer. I'm sure children and their parents are very excited about this news. And then finally, we expect a lot of the other activities as well, road trips with their children or go to cottage country. If the vaccination rates continue to climb well, I think we'll see a much more normal summer for 2021.
Well, looking forward to that, Dr. Raut. Great having you on Forum Daily again, and we'll see you again next week, sir.
Thanks so much.
And when we return, the Canadian dollar is seeing its highest level in 6 years. We'll talk about what that means for Canada's economy with Brendan Caldwell from Caldwell Securities Limited after the break. Stay with us. We'll have more national and international news coming up. The technology and renewable energy sectors pushed Canada's main stock index to a new high as the loonie hovered around 83 cents US, which is its highest level in 6 years. The Canadian dollar is the best performing currency in 2021. Experts credit the loonie's success to an increase in prices for crops, energy, and metals. Export receipts are also at a record high and are expected to increase, while the cost of lumber is also on a rise, with shipments nearly doubling in the first quarter. However, some economists warn that this may contribute to more stress for key sectors that may be left out of the commodities division. So what does a stronger Canadian dollar mean for Canada's economy overall? Well, joining us now is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Welcome back to Forum Daily, Brendan.
Thank you, Nima.
So what is contributing to the successful growth of the Canadian dollar?
Well, as you mentioned in your intro, it's this commodity, that commodity, the other commodity, but really there's only one commodity, and that's oil. Canada is the only normal country in the world whose currency is really a petrocurrency. After us, perhaps comes Norway and then Mexico, and then the rabbit hole goes very deep after that. Energy prices, which were very weak during the depths of the pandemic, have come roaring back, both due to supply constraints and increasing demand as the world opens up again, particularly in the United States. And we are, as I say, the only real country in the world that has a currency that trades, and that currency is so dependent on the price of oil. So we got a price of energy going up, the loonie is taking wing.
So I guess the big question is this good news for Canada's economy overall?
Well, if you were traveling, it would be great. I mean, the pound and the US dollar and the euro were much less expensive so your trip to France or Florida would be cheaper. Except, of course, no one's going to France or Florida. I think it's even illegal to go to Bob Cajun. So it's not as helpful to the retail person, the individual who would normally take advantage of that. It is somewhat helpful to exporters, of course, because the strong commodity prices have been helpful. But again, if you're exporting in US dollars and your costs are in Canadian dollars, if your labor costs, then that isn't very helpful. If it's offset by higher commodity prices, great. But I think, as you alluded to in your introduction, if what you make is not commodities, but finished products or services, your costs are in US dollars, you're exporting, so your costs are in Canadian dollars, you're exporting in US dollars or some other currency, it's not as helpful.
So what kind of sectors do you think are going to be affected negatively by this increase in the dollar's value?
Well, you would think intuitively that a strong Canadian dollar means a strong Canada. And yes, it is helpful, but really, again, if your costs are in Canadian dollars and that Canadian dollar is strong, it means your costs have gone up from low 70s to now low 80s, 83 cents, I think is where it is at present. So you're seeing everything from the film industry potentially impacted, to technology, to even the commodity sectors, as I mentioned earlier, but at least they have an offset. But when the Canadian dollar got up to more than par, more than 100 cents on the US dollar, you saw in Toronto, we felt this particularly, the film sector almost entirely shut down because it just became too expensive to make movies in Canada. But ultimately, we like seeing the Royal York Hotel in the back of a movie shot and pretending we're somewhere in Sweden or wherever the movie is supposed to be shot, Manhattan, and it's just not. So I think a lot of sectors have the potential to be affected by this.
So, what kind of economic disparities would this present for policymakers that are trying to bring Canada out of this pandemic without leaving anyone behind?
Well, I think this pandemic has left a lot of people behind. The disparity between rich and poor, how they've got treatment, how they've been exposed to the virus. The one person commented online that we've learned, if nothing else, how to keep rich people safe during a pandemic. So it's a problem. Like, it's a bigger picture problem more than just the dollar. And even now, you're not seeing people that are affluent coming down with cases of COVID, certainly not fatal cases of COVID. Sorry, I'm on a hobby horse. Talking about the dollar, I think that it'll be difficult to get people back to work, to hire people. It'll push more employers toward technological solutions, which require fewer people to work on them. George Jetson in the old 60s sitcom, his one job was to push a red button to make the factory start. That's not quite where we're at, but it's where we're going to, and a high Canadian dollar accelerates that. So it's going to be difficult for people to find jobs coming out of the pandemic as employers look to technological solutions.
All right, Brendan, thank you again for joining us on Forum Daily, and we'll see you again next week. Facebook has allegedly shut down a pro-Israel page that reportedly had 77 million followers. Its founder, Mike Evans, says that critics bombarded the Jerusalem Prayer Group site with more than 1 million comments and then said they had never posted to the site. Many posts were anti-Semitic. A Facebook company spokesperson said the group was removed over spam and inauthentic behavior. Mr. Evans claims that the flood of complaints about supposed fake posts was a complete scam and fraud. Lebanon's acting foreign minister has stepped down after he suggested in a TV interview this week that Gulf Arab countries had provided backing to extremists, helping the rise of the Islamic State group. The minister also used the term Bedouin in a derogatory manner to describe Gulf Arab nationals. His remarks caused a diplomatic fracas. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait summoned the Lebanese ambassadors in their capitals in protest. They accused the minister of violating diplomatic norms and making derogatory and racist statements. German authorities searched more than 40 apartments and other buildings in Berlin today in connection with the spread of child abuse images after receiving tips from the United States. All of the suspects were men between the ages of 17 and 84. A senior investigator said 2/3 of the men were already known to police, half of them in connection with sexual offenses. Investigators confiscated computers, smartphones, and other data storage devices. Chad's deputy foreign minister is warning the UN Security Council that mercenaries and foreign fighters from Libya are crossing into the Sahel, threatening to undermine gains in fighting terrorism by 5 West African nations. Omar Ibn Daoud also warned that exacerbating the situation in the Sahel will be harmful to Africa as a whole and could turn the continent into a battlefield and base for international terrorism. He says more than 400 people have been killed in attacks in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger since March. European legislators have adopted a proposal to combat online piracy of live sporting events that includes the option to remove illegal broadcasts within half an hour. EU lawmakers also called on the European Commission to amend the legislation on intellectual property rights for live sporting events because they are not protected by the bloc's copyright rules. MEPs say the new rules should not target viewers who are often not aware that the content they are watching is illegal. Across much of Asia, taxi drivers are starved for customers, weddings are suddenly canceled, and schools are closed as COVID-19 comes surging back in countries where it had seemed to be well under control. Taiwan, considered a major success in the battle against the virus, has registered over 1,000 domestic cases since last week and placed 600,000 people in 2-week medical isolation. Hong Kong and Singapore have postponed a quarantine-free travel bubble for a second time. The International Olympic Committee and local organizers opened 3 days of meetings today and some final planning before attempting to start the postponed Tokyo Olympics in just over 9 weeks. However, they are meeting widespread skepticism, with polling showing 60 to 80% oppose holding the games amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Medical groups have also expressed strong opposition, with the virus far from under control in Japan, where only 2% of the population is fully vaccinated. Ireland is facing a medical crisis due to a ransomware attack. Tech experts are working to get the nation's medical computer system working again, but authorities say it could be weeks before things return to normal. Thousands of doctors' appointments, cancer treatment sessions, and surgeries were canceled or delayed. The Associated Press says a Russian-speaking hacker group wants $20 million to restore the data that it swiped. Irish officials say they received a ransom demand, but they won't pay it. Meanwhile, it's a great day for the French. Cafe and restaurant terraces are reopening today after a pandemic shutdown of more than 6 months. The French government is lifting restrictions incrementally to stave off a resurgence of COVID-19. Museums, theaters, and cinemas are reopening, along with outside areas of restaurants. Avicii's legacy will live on in Sweden, as one of the country's popular arenas is being renamed the Avicii Arena. Avicii's father made the announcement on Wednesday, about 3 years after the chart-topping Swedish DJ-producer died by suicide at the age of 28. The indoor arena in Stockholm first opened in 1989 as Stockholm Globe Arena, but its name changed in 2009 to Ericsson Globe. The arena houses more than 16,000 seats for concerts and is shaped like a large white ball. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and be sure to follow our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, thank you for joining us on the Forum Daily, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.